Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, of a very special guest. Comes to us from London. His full name is Mark H. Sutherland, Sutherland. And if you're watching this on Rumble, Rockfin, or X Twitter, you'll see the cover of his new book. Full title is Exterminating Poverty, the true story of the Eugenic plan to get rid of the poor and the Scottish doctor who fought against it. And it looks like he wrote this in conjunction with Neil Sutherland. Mark is a trainer, facilitator, and executive coach who lives with his wife and son. You usually live in Sydney, but you're in London right now. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Gotcha.
my wife got a posting.
Awesome. He has an MBA. He's born in Singapore, so he's kind of got an international background. He has a website where you can see more about this book. I'll try to drop the website right now. It's exterminatingpovertybook.com, so people can check that out. And there's also contact information there. But we were kind of talking in the pre-show about how this issue is still present today, this kind of population control, eugenics issue, maybe not as worth talking in the public forum, but certainly elites and other people are very concerned about that. But this isn't an idea that started in the 21st century, and I think this book tells more about that. So Mark can talk more about that. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, William, and thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. So for people who haven't heard your name or this book, maybe you can talk about your background in greater detail and then your research leading up to the writing and publication of Exterminating Poverty.
Sure. Look, the H in my name stands for Halliday, and I was named after the Scottish doctor who fought against eugenics. He was Halliday Gibson Sutherland. He lived between 1882 and 1960. Growing up, I learned that he had become involved in a big court case in 1923 against Marie Stopes, who, if you haven't heard her name before, she's the British Margaret Sanger, at exactly the same time proliferating much the same sort of agenda. And I took an interest as to why he stood up against Stopes's work so vehemently, because at the time, as I understand it, people were having large families, 10, 11, 12 children, some of them stillborn. And so why would this fellow turn up and sort of really say, look, this woman's experimenting on the poor? It just seemed unreasonable. When I went to the biographies of Stopes to look for the answer, they told me, well, simple answer is he's a Roman Catholic doctor. Catholics don't like contraceptives, therefore he is trying to impose Catholic teachings on Protestant Britain. So I thought, very interesting. Anyway, years later after the event, I discovered his papers at home in 2013, and I decided to research it. And I found that the story told by the biographers, when compared to actually what happened in the trial, there were huge gaps, huge omissions, that really, it wasn't historical. And what I learned was that what had been bucketed, he'd actually been bucketed as this patriarchal, zealous bigot who wanted to chain women to the kitchen sink. Whereas actually, no, he was fighting against eugenics. And it was really important to me because I realized, hang on, I've realized all this for many years based on the story that Stopes' biographers told me. That's the accepted story in society. And the fact is that even family believed the story. So that's why I thought I had to write the book.
Right. So it wasn't fully complete. It's not very, I would say this is not very well known in the States. So some of these characters, maybe you can talk more in detail about Stopes and Sutherland and how they came to trial there. And the kind of differences, I think here we would call it defamation. So there is a distinct kind of provable case in the UK as opposed to American jurisprudence, right?
Yeah. Well, they butted heads because effectively he wrote a book in 1922 called Birth Control, a statement of Christian doctrine against the Neo-Malthusians. And in it, he referred to Stopes as a German doctor of philosophy who had opened a family planning clinic in a poor part of London, and where he said she was using one of the most dangerous types of contraceptives available. And that came under the heading of exposing the poor to experiments. So she sued him for libel. You mentioned about hearing about the people backing her. Many of the names are still eminent today, such as George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, and a whole lot of other people who, while they're not eminent today, were in their own time. And if I were to tell you, for instance, that one of them was Sir William Bayliss, and you might say, well, who the hell's he? He was the fellow who identified and found the role of hormones. Or another fellow called Arbuthnot Lane, never heard of him, but he was the fellow who pioneered the techniques of mending bones with wires and metal plates. And so you've heard of what they did, these people. And so it was really, really eminent people pushed behind her clinic.
Right. So you would say she was kind of like an early Planned Parenthood type thing in the UK. Would you agree with that?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
And also, and Planned Parenthood here has very important backers, maybe Gates Foundation or Rockefeller Foundation. So these are eminent men. These are all eminent intellectuals. Shaw, Wells, Russell, New World Order types. I think Wells himself wrote a book, New World Order, and all about eugenics, right? So they're overlapping or carrying on the work of Darwin and Galton, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And you can find at the turn of the 1800s, the 1900s, H.G. Wells writes something along the lines of putting people to death if they're, not up to scratch. There's a film you can see online on YouTube of Shaw saying that he was advocating that people should go before a public committee, much like you'd go before what we'd call the income tax commissioner, your sort of IRS, and you sit down in front of them and you say, well, this is what I've done over the last year, and you have to prove that actually you haven't been a burden to society and that you're more productive than you are consuming. And if you failed that test, Shaw was advocating that you should be put to death. And so, yeah, there was some pretty crazy ideas at that time.
Yeah, it was more popular pre-Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany took it to the next degree. But yeah, it was also it was across the Atlantic too. There was a lot of turn of the century eugenicists in the US as well. So it's not limited to Germany or UK or anything like that. So yeah. How did this case progress? This is kind of the main theme of your book is these two characters meeting in court, correct?
Well, how it progressed was that she sues him for libel. He gets the writ in May 1922, and there's a whole lot of pre-trial hearings that happen before it eventually gets to the High Court in London in front of a jury in February 1923. Both sides line up expert witnesses, and effectively Stopes, I think her strategy was really to have the great and the good come and say what a tremendous job she was doing, and to say that it was, when she wrote books, that it was perfectly valid as to what she wrote. I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. In the defamatory words in the book, Dr. Sutherland wrote that he referred to the case of Bradlaugh and Besant, which had happened about 45 years before, so I think in the 1880s. And they were Malthusians who had printed a Malthusian tract, and they were in court for obscenity. And so when I'm saying Stopes's witnesses are all saying, well, what she wrote in her books, the parts that were considered to be erotic or heading in that direction, they were saying, look, all knowledge should be known. And basically saying that she was doing a jolly good piece of work. Dr. Sutherland's witnesses, on the other hand, they came in and they were going for the defense of truth. And in defamation, he'd written something, so it's a libel. And in defamation, there are a number of defenses. And the ones relevant here was that, one, it was true. Because if I call somebody the worst crook in London, it's not fair if they are the worst crook in London and they take me to court and they can get damages for it. So if it's true, then they don't have an action that way. When you do go to trial, it's like a trapeze act, and you're sort of doing a flying trapeze, leaping from rope to rope. And what you do is you say, okay, what if that defense fails? Well, if that defense fails, we're going to have a net underneath. If we fall, what we're going to do is we're going to have a net underneath, and that is called fair comment. And fair comment is, if somebody's a private person and I insult them and it's defamatory, yeah, they got an action against me. On the other hand, if they're doing something of social or political importance, of public issue, it's perfectly fair that I criticize them. And so that's the machinations. Sutherland's team had to justify that she was exposing the poor to experiment. And what he said was that if you proliferate contraceptives as widely as she was doing, and with the agenda that she was doing, he was saying that you're going to run out of people. You're going to have the birth rate like we have today. And in other forums at the time, he said that the end of European civilization might be owing to a lack of European children, precisely what we're seeing. So he said it's a social experiment, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. The other thing he did, though, his team did, was to bring in a device known as the gold pin or the gold spring, which was an early IUD, which people didn't know, or experts disagreed as to whether it was a contraceptive, it would enhance conception, or if it was an abortifacient. And so take your pick. They were saying you're using this device, therefore that's experimental. And so that's the main tussle between the two sides.
Right. And so how was this taken publicly? Like, this was kind of like the monkey trial. It's interesting. Her name is Stopes. It's like this. It reminds me of Snopes. But it's kind of like it was of great interest in the public as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And also particularly since she was known as the author of a book in 1918, best-selling book, perennially best-selling book called Married Love, in which she discussed issues such as contraception, such as the relationships between men and women, and so on and so forth. So there were, she was known, had a bit of a sort of risque aura to her name. So for instance, if you go to sort of West End of London, around the seedier parts, around Brewer Street, Soho, or something like that, you would see bookshops, and they would have a finger pointing upwards, and then they would say, and then they have a picture of a cervical cap, and they'd say, use the, you can buy the devices of Dr. Marie Stopes here, and stuff like that. And so there was a sort of a bit of a racy edge to her work, and that would have caused a lot of interest.
Right, so that was the choices back then, was a cervical cap or an IUD. This is pre-pill, obviously. So
my research at the time showed that with the exception of the oral contraceptive pill, there was huge variety of contraceptives available. It's just that who was using them and where they were available. So for instance, you would go to a rubber shop and you'd get condoms there, I guess. I I don't know what happens in the United States, but there's a sort of a nudge and a wink joke that when you go to a barber, the barber, when he finishes, sort of dusting you off, setting your jacket straight, he sort of says, "Something for the weekend, sir." And the idea is that you're making yourself look smart, that you might be going on a date and you might be hoping to have consequences for that date. So you might need a condom or something like that. So it's something for the weekend, sir. And, so that's how it's done. Or it's done through catalogs used by middle and upper class women. But the range of devices that they could use was very, very wide.
Interesting. So there's still, I guess it's always been a concern in any human society of different ways of contraception or avoiding contraception, but it's always had a theological element to it. Isn't that the case in this trial and Stopes, and also that the church had something to say other than the Catholic Church as well, right? Who are against contraception.
Yeah, just to backtrack on my last answer, was the thing I didn't perhaps draw out enough was the people who didn't use contraceptives were poor and working class families. But as far as the religious aspects of the case, Dr. Sutherland began to oppose eugenics long before he became a Catholic. He became a Catholic in 1919 or 1920 when he married my grandmother, who was an Irish Catholic. And he was, one social historian, Anne Farmer, says that he, like other Catholic converts such as G.K. Chesterton and Letitia Fairfield, Rebecca West's sister, and Hilaire Belloc, that Dr. Sutherland was attracted to Catholicism because it was alone standing up against eugenics. And that comes as a surprise because you'd think that, trade union leaders, the Fabians, the socialists, all the people that purport to be the champions of the working class, you would think that they would actually be dead against eugenics. But when you look into it, they were very, very pro-eugenics. Because as much as anything else, it would enable them to control all of the means of production in society. So the thing I'm saying is, yes, Dr. Sutherland was a Roman Catholic doctor, but he started to oppose it long before, when he was an agnostic by belief and an atheist in practice. And he got into it primarily because he was trying to prevent and cure tuberculosis. And he really got involved in that. He made Britain's first public health cinema film. He arranged and edited and contributed to books by experts. He opened schools for tuberculous children. And he was really in the forefront. And at the same time, you have the eugenicists in the British medical and scientific establishment saying, "You're wasting your time. Yes, we know germs are involved, but the germs only affect the feeble people with the round shoulders who aren't very healthy, who have very, very narrow lungs, and they have defective heredity. So sure, spend all this money on sanatoria and treatments. It's a complete waste of money." The alternative, which they suggested, was that you would let tuberculosis, you'd let nature take its course. And if the poor and the weak were to die out before they were able to reproduce, problem solved. Now, it should be pointed out that tuberculosis was a disease of poverty that affected the poor around 3-4 times more than the wealthier people. And so the idea is, yes, it does affect the poor. People like Dr. Sutherland would say, well, it's not their hereditary, it's because they have really shabby living conditions, appalling working conditions, poor working practices, pollution control, and everything else like that. They're not getting enough air. And that's why they've got this disease. So yes, there were religious aspects to him, and he was backed by the Catholic Church when they finally got their funding together. But Stopes believed he was put up by the Catholic Church to do it, to sort of cause the whole libel case. I've seen letters to her in the British Library in London from a private detective firm that she hired to find out, which says that's absolutely not the case. And the letter is actually quite tense because he's saying, I can't tell you who told me. And the implication in the letter is the person who told him was so senior in the Catholic Church that no way was she to disclose that there had been a leak.
Wow, fascinating. So there was those type of things going on too. That's incredible. They used to call tuberculosis consumption, right? Because they didn't know the cause, so they thought it was, it's just something wrong with it. Yeah, like you said, they didn't understand it was just penicillin could have solved it. So it was very different, long suffering, and send people to the south of France to to get better and stuff like that. So things have changed for the better. It's almost like only a third world disease these days. But so there's all that background going on. And what else was going on? I mean, this whole eugenics, Malthusianism, Galtonism. I mean, these people promoting it mostly were atheists, right? Would you agree with that?
That's correct. And I think Charles Darwin's book Origin of Species, and it being pushed by, I can't remember which Huxley, but really pushed atheism. People had a belief in God, and all of a sudden you're descended from the apes. And you can see it in the, all sorts of measures, such as people getting vocations to become Anglican priests. If we're descended from the monkeys, there isn't a God, basically. And they had a very materialist society. And it's interesting too, because Darwin's work, when he said that he was inspired by Thomas Robert Malthus, the Reverend Thomas Malthus, who expounded his theory of population in the late 1700s. And he effectively said, look, the population increases beyond the carrying capacity of the land. And then unless people abstain from sex, or they do things such as contraceptives where they don't want the products of sex, if you don't have those two brakes preventing the vehicle moving forward, you go over the cliff. And the cliff is the Malthusian disaster, by which populations increased. We're scrambling for resources. Everybody's fighting over resources. So there's war, pestilence, and famine. And they really believe this. And just as an aside, in fact, during World War I read that the Malthusian League in London, in the midst of World War I, so 1916, 1917, where large numbers of British people, Americans, but being slaughtered in the trenches. And guess what? The Malthusians say, great, let's have an embargo on babies, because this is what we're looking for. I mean, I shouldn't laugh, but it's pretty crazy stuff.
It's a mentality, like it's something different. And I think Malthus also had a more interesting, nuanced background. He wasn't independent. I believe he was associated with the Royal Society and were promoters of his work. So there was kind of like a class element to his views as well, which is still similar with the class. I don't know if you go into it in the book, but the upper classes always feel like the lower classes are having too many kids, too fertile, and a threat. They always feel threatened. And so I think Malthus is part of that outlook. Yeah. What was the Society for Constructive Birth Control? You have an appendix about them, and that's part of her. It's birth control, but also racial progress. So people are talking about birth control, but it's also in the context of kind of racism, right? Is that correct? You still there?
Yeah, I think that I think that Sanger was her eugenics was very much on the basis there were too many Catholics, Jews, and African Americans, and in Britain it was more on on a class basis. Though there were racial aspects of it as well. I mean, when we talk about racism today, we think of skin color racism, but the fact of the matter is that you just have to read the writings about Galton and the way he writes about the Irish. that he regards them as a subnormal race. And likewise, so there was sort of tensions between the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, the English on a racial barrier as well. So there was that back lot into it.
So that is definitely an element of it. And I mean, was this, I mean, what was your research like to go into to get all the case information regarding Stopes and v. Sutherland? I mean, what was it like going to do that research?
Look, it was really, really wonderful. I normally live in Sydney, and it was great when I got over here to have a project to work on with my brother, to spend days in the Wellcome Institute, British Library, and then catch up for curry and a couple of beers and then go back and do it the next day. So that was very enjoyable. From when I saw the skullduggery that took place in the court case, such as Stopes amending witness statements that have been signed, sealed, and delivered, ready to go. And she writes to her witness and said, I prefer you actually to remove the part of the gold spring or whatever like that. It was amazing because, I literally had some tingles down my spine of like, wow, my grandfather would really have loved to have seen the documents that I was looking at. The other thing is there's a lot of material that still exists today. Stopes, she's a bit of a megalomaniac, as in a bit of a megalomaniac. And she didn't throw anything out. And so I was finding billing slips for the solicitor. I was finding documents of the court transcripts with her comments in the side, sort of blaming this person or that person. And so it was just really, really enjoyable experience to be in such really fine libraries and bring it alive. It was very difficult because the materials were in London and I was in Sydney. But that's where my brother Neil Sutherland really came to the fore by going to, the Westminster Archdiocese, organizing which documents we'd look at in the Wellcome Institute. So when I was over there. The other thing is too that finding my grandfather's papers with this in mind really gave me a purpose to go through and to get to know about his life a lot more and see the original documents. It was a wonderful experience. Having said that, I think fiction works are good because you can make stuff up. Whereas in this one, I was very aware, a grandson of the Scottish doctor named Halliday. If I saw my name on the front cover, I think, this guy's going to be completely biased. And so what I did was I thought, well, I'm going to cite documents. I'm going to give chapter and verse. And so in 320 pages, there are 700 or so, just shy of 700 citations. And also what I've done is no one knows me as a historian. And so if I opine this or I say my interpretation is that, no one cares. But what I do is I tell a narrative history. And so I bring people in the court and they can see the court transcripts. And rather than boring, there's a real cut and thrust. I comment so that people can sort of get the inside baseball as to actually what's happening. But yeah, it really sort of say to anybody, say the disciples and biographers of Stopes who say, well, we don't believe you. I'm saying, well, don't
I'm losing you a little bit there. Don't argue with me, right?
Me.
So she still has
argue with Stopes because I've cited what she said. I've given.
Right. Let's turn off the cam. Let's see if we can turn off your camera. Maybe that'll help with the connection. One of the interesting things that where did you find? I don't know if you can hear me now, but where did you find Holiday Sutherland's writings? Were they left to a university, or were they kept in the family? Mark, if you can turn off your video, just say stop cam. That might help with the connection. One of us is slowing down. Yeah, one of us is slowing down. Turn off your camera.
You, William,
Stop.
but you're breaking up.
Okay, stop the camera on your side. Hit stop cam on the bottom left of the screen. It'll help with the latency. I see you were on Hervoye more. It just showed geopolitics and empire. So you can get a lot of connections there. Turn off your cam, Mark. Hit stop cam on there. Yeah, he's coming in and out. I think his book is on Amazon right now. Full title is Exterminating Poverty, the True Story of the Eugenic Plan to Get Rid of the Poor and the Scottish Doctor Who Fought Against It. And I'll put a link.
Will do.
Okay. The link to Holiday Sutherland's website, so you can see that.
How about now?
You can get, it'll be better. Yeah, turn off your cam. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, cam should now be off.
Yeah, good. I'm directing people to Holiday Sutherland's website, so you can check that out. And also exterminatingpovertybook.com, so people can check that out. Where did Holiday have his papers at a university, or was he kept it in your kind of family?
It's done.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's my side. You still there? Anyway, there's also the book is on Amazon.
Yeah, I'm still here, but you're
okay. Yeah, slowing down.
What I'll do is I will
stopping the cam is good. The book is on Amazon. There's a Kindle. There's paperback. And it covers. It's interesting from this different perspective because we kind of see it here with Bassan. I mean, some of these other characters in the U.S. Well, Stopes is a different story, so it's interesting to kind of see it from that. But it's actually it's interesting. They had the same issues back then as they do now, which is declining birth rate, which is actually a bigger problem. And that's Elon Musk is always railing about the declining birth rate. You're not going to have a sustainable society at a certain thing. So it's not overpopulation, it's underpopulation, believe it or not, which is like it's going to invert. So this whole population bomb, it's more of like a population cavern or something like that, which but you can see this kind of pro-natalist, anti-natalist system and the divisions between kind of typically Christian or church views and atheistic views, because the atheistic view is always there's no provision, God won't provide, and you have too many kids. There's too much bounty. There's always less of everything. There's less of everything to go around, which I think is interesting. Mark, are you still back? You're back. Yes. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Where did you find the papers for Holiday Sutherland?
In 2013, I went down to my mother's cellar because I had a little packing case, and my son was, at the age where he rediscovered vinyl. So I went to get all my vinyl records, the LPs, and I tripped over this suitcase. And it was rotted in one corner, so I thought, better get this out. It was full of papers, and they were Dr. Sutherland's papers. And so that was quite fortuitous. So I just went through and catalogued all of those. But it was quite... We knew they existed, but we'd moved after my father died in 87. We'd moved house. We weren't sure where the papers were. And then suddenly I rediscovered them.
Wow, that's really fortunate. Like all that, those are like priceless papers. Especially like it's going to just this whole natalist, anti-natalist argument, overpopulation, underpopulation. I don't think the arguments are ever going to go away. And they're really important. Yeah.
And they always confuse overcrowding with overpopulation. And, if you fly over large parts of the world, there aren't people there. And if you look at the production of food, I think it's the number one or number two producer of food in the world is the Netherlands. And it's like, hang on, that's a very small part of land. And, a lot of it's underwater reclaimed. And if we really were as vulnerable as they said, you wouldn't think the Netherlands would do it. It'd be too small to feed so many people. So yeah, it's a real mystery, and framing things a certain way and telling everybody we're running out of resources,
right,
and pushing that Malthusian argument in different ways today.
They're still out there. Al Gore and some of these Kerry, different sides. And it is interesting because you'd expect maybe the left that represents the more labor working class, like you mentioned, that they're just as Malthusian as the right. So it is counterintuitive in a lot of ways. It's really something else. But yeah,
and if you see some of the measures they recommend, I don't know, have you heard of Margaret Sanger's My Plan for Peace?
Can you retell that, please?
Well, see, it's actually it was published, I think it was in the early 30s, and her plan for peace was that I'm trying to think, the dope fiends and prostitutes. And I'm laughing because the language they use, it's like, are you a dope fiend? Okay, no, I don't want you today. But the dope fiends, prostitutes, and other ne'er-do-wells in American cities would be given a choice. You can be sterilized, or if you're not going to be sterilized, you're going to have to go and live on some camp in the middle of America somewhere. And they would be given activities to do. They would be segregated, the men from the women, to ensure that they didn't have any children. And the idea was that a lot of the dope fiends and prostitutes would say, actually, I want to stay in the city. They would be able to have sex, but they wouldn't reproduce. And so this is how these numbers would be controlled. Now, what's interesting is she talks about in her paper about there being 5 million guards against the denigration of American society. So you're thinking, hang on, is that the number of inmates, or is that the number of people guarding the inmates? And it is completely nuts. But then, you see him from time to time on chat shows, even on Australian television, Paul Ehrlich, Fated. You read his book.
Yeah.
And he suggests they put sterilizers in the water.
Right, without consent. Yeah, it's really incredible.
And he says, I didn't advocate it. It was just an idea. But people are always having ideas. And it sets other people up to go and actually implement them.
Yeah, no question. I think Ehrlich is very irresponsible. Population bomb and the paranoia and all that stuff. And there's, like you said,
through.
Yeah.
He followed through with a book which he wrote with John Holdren, who was in the Obama administration. They wrote a book on population. And they talk about compulsory abortion. Of course, he's not saying they should do it, but hey, I might put the idea in somebody's head. And these people are, treated like they're fated intellectuals.
Yes.
Quite remarkable.
Yeah, very not seen as crazy, anti-human people, but, hey, these are great ideas. But like I said, people who advocate for this, they have a different view. They always see people with too many kids these days as like, festering burden and all this other stuff. It's really something else. But they didn't. It's not just from the 21st century. It goes all the way back through this stuff, the Stopes trial and Sutherland, and these arguments and these juxtapositions are still there. But Mark, we are at the 40-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed?
Just to I haven't mentioned the differential birth rate, which was the real thing that gave Malthusianism and eugenics its oomph at the beginning of the 20th century. And what the differential birth rate was that Britain's population doubled between 1800 and about 1880. And from about the mid-1880s onwards, the birth rate started to fall. It wasn't evenly represented across all classes. And so what you had was the upper and middle classes having fewer children, but the working classes and the poor, they were having the same number of families. And so eugenicists, Malthusians, were really fretting that the next generation, over one half of the numbers of the next generation, were being produced by the lowest quarter in the society. And they called it racial degeneration or even race suicide. And that's really what gave it the oomph and some urgency as to we have to act now. But other than that, no, thank you so much for having me. If people, want to have a look, Exterminating Poverty book, or get the book, or if they go to HalidaySutherland.com, what I will do is I will do show notes for this show where I'll give, the evidence for the things I'll say, links to Sanger's My Plan for Peace and stuff, so that people can really see this stuff for itself. The other thing I'd say, if I'm not stretching the friendship.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The other thing I'd say is that back then, they were in their middle class, upper class bubble. They didn't have to concern the poor. The Labour Party, the Socialist parties didn't really exist at that stage, or they were just in their nascent stages. And so they didn't really have to care what the working class thought. So if they want to call them, as Stokes called them, very unscientific language for a scientist, where she called them hordes of defectives or the spawn of drunkards, they really, really would label people in that way. And I think the really important thing about this story is that people can actually see the agenda with plain speaking. Because after the 1960s, they decided to implement a policy of crypto-eugenics in both the United States and in Britain. And they don't tell you what they're doing. They'll just do it, but they won't tell you. So this is a real expose of just lifting the lid and see what these people are up to today. It's by no means over.
No, it's not. The crypto eugenics is one of the scarier things imaginable. And I think you're right. They're absolutely doing it. But people check this out. I'll put links to both websites, the HalidaySutherland.com and the Exterminating Poverty book. And people go get this book, available on Amazon and Kindle. Full title again is Exterminating Poverty, the true story of the eugenic plan to get rid of the poor and the Scottish doctor who fought against it. And again, the author is Mark H. Sutherland. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, William.
All right, stay there.
Thanks.